I used to believe I understood my own mind. I thought I was self-aware, emotionally intelligent, capable of choosing love wisely. I thought I knew what red flags look like. And yet, when I met him, all of that certainty dissolved into fascination. He was charming in a way that felt rare, magnetic in a way that made rooms tilt toward him. When he spoke, people listened. When he looked at me, I felt chosen, elevated, special. I told myself that this intensity was passion, that this confidence was strength, that his sharp words were simply honesty. I didn't know then that admiration can be the first step into control. I didn't know that sometimes what feels like love is only the hunger of someone who needs to own another person to feel real. He thought he understood his mind, but what he didn't. Tino was that a resource existed that could help him rebuild his life. You'll find it in the description and comments. At the beginning, I wasn't afraid. I was flattered. I was seen, or at least I thought I was. At first, everything was intoxicating. He mirrored my dreams, praised my intelligence, told me I was different from everyone else. "You're not like other people," he said, and I took it as devotion instead of what it really was, separation. Slowly, subtly, the world began to narrow. He questioned my friends' intentions. He joked about my family being too emotional. He corrected my memories, my reactions, even my tone of voice. If I disagreed, he smiled in a way that made me feel childish. If I expressed hurt, he sighed as if burdened by my sensitivity, and still I stayed. Because after every moment of doubt came a moment of warmth, after every wound, a gift, after every argument, an apology wrapped in poetry. This is how an abusive relationship doesn't look like violence at first. It looks like devotion with conditions. It looks like love that must be earned. I began to question myself more than I questioned him. Was I overreacting? Was I too emotional? Was I the problem? I told myself that real relationships are hard, that passion is messy, that compromise hurts. I did not yet see that what I was calling hard was actually erosion. The conflicts grew sharper over time. He didn't just disagree anymore, he dismissed. He didn't just criticize, he humiliated, sometimes privately, sometimes with an audience. If I succeeded, he found a way to diminish it. If I struggled, he found a way to blame me for it. He needed to be the center of every story, even my pain. When I cried, he told me I was manipulating him. When I asked for space, he accused me of abandonment. When I tried to explain how small I was starting to feel, he told me that I was imagining things, that I was too dramatic, that I was lucky to have someone who was willing to be honest with me. The more I tried to prove my worth, the more unreachable it became. I lived in a constant state of anxiety, rehearsing conversations in my head, calculating my words, measuring my expressions. I loved him, I told myself. That love should not feel like walking on broken glass, and yet I kept walking. Because I was afraid of who I would be without him. Because he had slowly convinced me that without his approval, I was nothing. The breaking point did not come in the form of a single dramatic moment. It came quietly, like exhaustion. One night, after another argument in which he told me I was ungrateful and impossible to love, I looked at myself in the mirror and did not recognize the person staring back. My eyes were tired in a way sleep could not fix. My shoulders were tense, even in stillness. I realized that I no longer asked what I wanted, only what would keep the peace. And suddenly, a question I had been avoiding rose to the surface. Is my boyfriend a narcissist? Not as a label, not as a diagnosis, but as a mirror to the patterns I was living inside. The need for admiration, the lack of empathy, the constant rewriting of reality, the way everything always came back to him. I felt a strange mixture of fear and clarity. If this was not love, then what had I been fighting so hard to preserve? And if I stayed, who would I become? That night, I did not leave, but something inside me shifted. I stopped trying to convince myself that pain was proof of devotion. The realization did not arrive as a sudden escape, but as a slow reclaiming of my own mind. I began to notice how often my thoughts were no longer mine, how my inner voice sounded suspiciously like his, how I anticipated his reactions before I even finished my sentences. I started writing things down, what happened, what was said, how I felt. And in seeing the patterns on paper, I could no longer deny them. This was not miscommunication. This was control. This was not passion. This was emotional manipulation. I was in an abusive relationship with a narcissistic boyfriend, and I had been calling it love because admitting the truth meant facing the grief of everything I had invested. Realization is painful, but it is also powerful. It is the moment when the fog begins to lift, when the mind starts to separate from the narrative it has been forced to live inside. I stopped asking how to fix him. I started asking how to protect myself. Rebuilding did not happen overnight. Leaving was terrifying. The silence after was even worse. Without his voice dominating my thoughts, my own fears became louder. I questioned my worth. I questioned my judgment. I questioned whether I had exaggerated everything. Trauma does not disappear just because the source is gone. It lingers in the nervous system, in the habits of self-doubt, and the instinct to apologize for existing. But slowly, through reflection, through learning, through confronting the patterns that had kept me trapped, I began to breathe again. I reconnected with people I had been distanced from. I allowed myself to feel anger instead of shame. I learned that love is not something you must suffer for to deserve, that boundaries are not cruelty, that empathy is not weakness. Piece by piece, I rebuilt not just my life, but my identity. The version of me that had been shrinking learned to take up space again. And now, when I look back, I don't only see pain. I see awareness. I see the quiet strength it took to choose myself in a story where I had been taught that my needs were irrelevant. I understand now how easily a toxic mind can rewrite reality, how narcissism can disguise itself as confidence, how abuse can wear the mask of romance. I also understand that my story is not unique. How many people are asking themselves right now, in silence, is this love, or am I losing myself? How many are trapped in relationships that erode their identity while convincing them that the erosion is their fault? If this story feels familiar, know this. You are not weak for staying, and you are not broken for struggling to leave. You are human. And healing begins the moment you stop abandoning yourself to keep someone else comfortable. At the end of my journey, I discovered guidance and a resource that helped me face anxiety and rebuild my life. You can access it too. The link is in the description and comments, because sometimes we don't need more willpower. We need clarity, structure, and support to undo the psychological damage left behind by toxic relationships. And if you are standing at the edge of your own realization, wondering whether what you're experiencing is love or control, remember this. You are allowed to choose peace. You are allowed to choose yourself. You are allowed to walk away from anyone who requires your suffering as proof of devotion. True freedom begins in the mind and only then appears in life. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content on toxic minds, narcissism, and emotional healing.